Schema Posse is one of the most prolific underground rap collectives to ever touch the game, helping to launch several careers and cementing its name in history as one of the all-time greats when it comes to music. Or, well, that's what I would be saying if it wasn't for the other side of Schema. The scandals, the fights, the issues, but of course, before anything, the music. But unfortunately, just like every other underground rap group, it seems like everything surrounding the music always gets in the way. Because when you put a bunch of people together who have drug addiction problems, ego, and difference of opinions, it's always going to lead to the same place. But this is a topic that really can't be covered all in one video because there's so much to it, so many details, so many key players, and over 10 years of history. So today, I just want to look at one member of Schema Posse, somebody that was there from the start all the way to the end, and that man is known as Kold. Now you may have not heard of him before, but just like many other members of the underground, he's an unsung hero who's been around tons of different people, made connections, friends, and inspired tons of music. Today I want to look at his contribution to the rap game as well as Schema Posse, but before we look at that, we have to talk about how he got there in the first place. So let's turn all the way back to 1983 to take a look at his childhood. He was born to his father, Randy Piper, and his mother, Cindy Collins. Now, these names are important because his father was actually part of a band known as Wasp, and his mother was actually the lead vocalist of a band known as Orchid, meaning that he was always around music even from a young age. Unfortunately, this happy family wouldn't stay together long because by the time he was 5, his parents would part ways and he ended up moving in with his grandparents in Long Beach. Now, this was quite different from Irvine because Long Beach is a lot more of a violent area, a lot of gang activity, a lot of police brutality, and Cold-Blooded would watch this all go down before his very eyes. All of this chaos during his formative years would lead him to retreat into hip-hop music, listening to Coolio, MC Hammer, Eazy-E, and most importantly, Bone Thugs, who actually inspired him to begin memorizing and writing down his own lyrics at the age of 11. And he even ended up starting his own rap group known as The Prophecy at the very same age, and they recorded all their music on a karaoke machine and even created a couple of demos on cassette. But before they could get too far, Cold-Blooded got into a little bit of trouble at school. Not certain exactly what went down here, but it seems like he actually committed a crime at school because he was given a robbery charge, a vandalism charge, and then after that he was expelled, given community service, and then he was shipped off to Las Vegas to live with his other pair of grandparents. It wasn't long after that his mother followed along, moving to Las Vegas with him, and he was able to move back in with her. But unfortunately, she was so busy working 2 jobs just to make ends meet that he was left alone most days with no friends and nothing to really do. He mostly spent his time listening to music, looking up to labels, even pretending to run his own, recording a couple more songs on cassette tape, smoking weed, and of course playing video games as well as watching a little bit of anime. During his time in middle school, Katie would always wear a Bone Thug shirt, and because of that, he eventually caught the attention of another fan of the group known as Cleva. The two boys would often hang out, listen to music, research on the early internet, and collect memorabilia related to the group. And they even began to make a little bit of money by downloading rare demos, burning them onto CDs, and then selling them to their classmates for a couple bucks. This ended up keeping them out of trouble, and they would even start to make their own music with a new group. And they named themselves Uncorruptible Thugs. But just as Cold-Blooded was starting to find peace with his new life, more tragedy would strike when unfortunately his mother would grow violently ill and then pass away in 2001. This left him homeless with nowhere to go besides crashing at his stepdad's place a couple nights a week. During this time, Cold-Blooded recorded 3 whole mixtapes, and then he ended up moving back to LA where he would meet a couple familiar faces from The Prophecy. Yeah, that's right, they were still together and Cold-Blooded would join up with them, and they actually started to make a serious go at making music. Even though it was good to be back with his old friends, life wasn't easy in LA. He ended up having to sell weed and CDs to try to make it by, but before long he tipped off the local gangs that he was selling in their area, so they tried to put a hit on him. So he took all the money that he had and moved back to Las Vegas, this time moving in with a group of friends that he had met before. And once he got back to Vegas, he ended up linking back up with Uncorruptible Thugs, and through one of his friends investing a lot of money, they were able to buy better mics, better equipment, and start making some pretty serious music. The group ended up producing a bunch of mixtapes together, and one of the members known as Relentless would introduce Cold-Blooded to 3-6 Mafia and an early Jay Green, somebody who would become very important to his life a little bit later on. During this time, Katie would also meet his wife over MySpace, and within 2 years they ended up getting married. Unfortunately, not long after that, the group would start to break up, with some members falling into hard drinking, others having kids and moving on with their lives, and others, well, of course, getting into drugs. Cold-Blooded's at the time best friend Cleva ended up taking a hiatus from music, and the two ended up drifting apart and never speaking again. By the time the group broke up, it was 2011 and the internet was starting to become a bigger and bigger thing. So Cold-Blooded knew he needed to change up his style, get more in tune with the times, and started rapping over some beats he found on YouTube that were more anime inspired. Unfortunately though, all the equipment that he was using with the Uncorruptible Thugs was taken when the group broke up, so he had to instead record himself on a webcam and try to use YouTube beats. This was before the time there was a type beat for every different type of instrumental you could ever think of, so the beats that were on there were pretty selective and there wasn't really a lot to pick from. Around the same time, he would discover Bandcamp, Daft Piff, and SoundCloud, and while he was interested in this new media and new way of sharing music, he was still kind of stuck with his old ways, recording music on cassettes and trying to pitch his music to indie labels. Unfortunately for KD, the world around him was changing fast, with the likes of Tyga and Drake on the rise. Hip-hop was morphing into a more pop-inspired genre, and it seems like the 90s type of rap was on its way out, and that was when KD decided that he was going to quit altogether and pursue something else. Or at least that's what would have happened if it wasn't for him discovering a rap vlog that was talking about Raider Clan and ASAP Mob. He really liked this DUI type of music style, and that these groups were trying to do everything on their own, creating their own videos, their own music, and doing everything without a label. So being inspired by these groups, he decided to give music one more chance and doubled down with SoundCloud, dropping 5 whole tapes on there over the course of a couple years, with the most important of all of them being Chirogenic 93, which included several beats from a producer known as Mr. Cisco. And all the music he was dropping on SoundCloud would eventually catch the attention of a couple underground artists like So What I'm Dead, Trippy the Kid, and most importantly, well, Mr. Cisco himself, who actually gave Cold Blooded a feature on his own solo album. And because of that project, he was able to get the attention of Dylan Ross, Bones, and Xavier Wolf, which he was a big fan of. He ended up sending Xavier a song called Bleach, and he liked it so much that he introduced Cold Blooded to Eddie Baker, and he was able to make more connections through the underground scene. Not long after that, Mr. Cisco would invite Cold Blooded to join his group called Boz Mafia, and he was actually able to get a feature from Jay Green, making a connection there. He would also often attend Xavier Wolf and Bones concerts, often vlogging the entire thing, and because of that, people started to really mess with him in the scene and eventually started to invite him backstage, where he finally got to meet Jay Green in real life. And after that day, Cold Blooded and Jay Green would form a close connection, talking almost every day on the phone, leading Jay Green to ask Cold Blooded, "What do you plan to do with the rest of your career?" To which Cold Blooded didn't really know what to say. He was working on a couple albums, he was definitely making some good connections, getting his buzz up, but he didn't really have a long-term plan for music. So when Jay Green told him that he had plans to create his own collective known as Schema Boys that was meant to rival both Raider Clan and ASAP Mob, Cold Blooded was on board. You see, at the time, Jay Green was actually pretty well known for his work with 3 6 Mafia, and he had a pretty prolific Facebook page that he would often share the music of other underground artists on. So when he made a Facebook post saying he was going to start a collective and he wanted people to join, it wasn't long before a bunch of underground artists would try to be part of it, including Ghostmane, who was already somewhat working with Jay Green, with him sharing a lot of his music on his page, as well as Iceberg Black, and of course, Cold Blooded himself. The group would start to make visuals for their music. Cold Blooded was running a Facebook page for Schema Boys, and the plan was to create a song with all 4 of them and then post the video on WorldStar, but unfortunately that never ended up happening. Despite that though, the group was gaining more and more traction by the day, and before long they were known as a force to be reckoned with within the underground scene. At the same time, they also tried to start a streetwear brand, but unfortunately Jay Green nor Cold Blooded were really involved with that, so it ended up flopping. But when it came to music, they were definitely killing it. Now it's important to note that the early Schema Posse was actually built off the whole funk genre. They were heavily inspired by early 90s Memphis rap, and that's really the style they were going for, and that's the reputation they had through a lot of 2015 and early 2016, but because of events that will soon follow, eventually their reputation was morphed into kind of an emo rap kind of group, which they never really were. As the year 2015 began to wrap up, Cold Blooded would drop his debut album known as Tuskiyami, featuring all currently active members of Sashala Waterboys, including a couple members of Schema Posse as well. Now before I go any further, Schema Posse is absolutely massive. It spans over 10 years. There's been so many members that have joined up, left, and I can't mention absolutely everybody in this video, but eventually everybody will get their own video. So for now, I'm only going to mention the members that are really important to the story. So if anybody's not mentioned in this video, it's only because I'm mostly focusing on Cold Blooded, but don't worry, every member will get a mention eventually when I do some more Schema Posse videos. But anyways, back to the story at hand. So at this point, Baz Mafia would fully morph into the Schema Boys, and they would introduce a couple new members as well. But even early on, you could already start to feel the dysfunction within the group, because Jay Green had this really annoying habit where he would always pick favorites. And it seems like Jay Green had a particular fascination with Ghostmane, trying to get him to change his style from the more funk-based stuff to a faster rap style that would start to get him a little bit more attention. And honestly, that wasn't a bad idea, but because he was giving so much attention to Ghostmane, they would lose members like Zootlegs, Young Grip, and of course, Eddie Baker. Okay, quick correction. It wasn't Eddie Baker, it was Baker Your Maker. Okay, I don't know why I got that confused. It just said Baker, but yeah, not Eddie Baker. He was around. He wasn't part of Schema Posse, but Baker Your Maker was. Okay, back to it. Now at this point you could really say the first generation of Schema was over, because after this point they would introduce Craig Zen, who would bring Lil Peep into the group, and these guys really became the face of Schema going forward. Now at first this was a good thing because all the new members were getting a lot of attention online, and because of that the OG members would also get a bigger buzz off the back of that, but Jay Green just couldn't let a good thing be because he would start to mess with the dynamic of Schema Boys once again. Because just like Ghostman before him, Jay Green saw Lil Peep as a star player in the Schema Posse, and he didn't want to let him be influenced by the other members. He told them that they weren't serious and there was no reason to join the group chat where the entire group was in. And Lil Peep ended up feeling out of place because of that. He never got to meet some members of the group, and he always felt like he was just kind of off in the distance, not really incorporated into the true Schema Posse the way that he should have been. Which of course would cause problems later down the road, but for now in 2016 things were really getting good. You had the Suicide Boys going on No Jumper, you had the early version of Grey Day, then known as Grey Scale, getting off the ground, Puya and the Buffet Boys were performing alongside Schema Boys, and it seems like the underground was really starting to form up into something important. And because of this Puya cosign, Schema Posse was really starting to gain a buzz within LA, but at the same time there was more shenanigans going on, because after the show only Jay Green and Ghostman were allowed to attend the after parties, where Kold Blooded and the rest of the OG members were left behind. And this really started to form a weird hierarchy within Schema Posse, where it seems like certain members were more famous than others and they weren't really a collective group anymore, and things were starting to get a little bit more tense and shifting apart, but at the same time they were trying to hold everything together. But just when it seemed like things were starting to settle down a little bit, Jay Green would announce that Lil Peep and Ghostman were going to be the new faces of the Schema Posse, and he was only going to be focusing on them for the time being. At first nobody in the collective thought this was that big of a deal, with them dropping the Get to Know Us project followed by the Elemental project not too far afterwards, but seeing as how Lil Peep and Ghostman's styles were so different from the regular funk stuff that Schema Posse was running with up to this point, they would start to get the reputation that they were an emo rap collective when they never really were. But at the time Kold Blooded was overall not affected by this, as he was working on his own solo project called Face Cloud, which included features from Bexy, Suicide Boys, and Trippy the Kid. Now at this point Craig Zen and Jay Green start to have a little bit of issues with each other, but it seems like they were able to squash it, and they were only really doing it to try to get a little bit more attention on their music, so overall it's not that important. Although it is an early sign that Craig Zen would start to create problems for the group as time went on, but for now everything seemed to be good. At this point Schema Posse starts to plan out their first ever tour. Lil Peep moves in with Omen 13 and Brennan Savage, and they end up doing their first headlining show where everybody gets to meet each other for the first time. This is when Omen 13 and Kold Blooded met for the first time. This is the first time that Kold Blooded met Lil Peep in real life. Lil Peep was actually blowing up at the time because he got a video on No Jumper, and Omen would become a big figure in Kold Blooded's life as time went on. The show went off without a hitch, with the only downside being that Kold Blooded didn't actually get to perform, and Lil Peep was actually pretty disappointed by that because he was a fan of Kold Blooded and wanted to perform alongside him. Luckily though, Kold Blooded got to perform at the very next show in Oakland, and this is where he would meet Killstation and Ned Arb for the very first time. Soon after that, Kold Blooded would go back to the Pasadena house, which is most well known for being the place that the videos for both White Tea and Gym Class were filmed, and he would meet up with Killstation and Peep, with the three of them really bonding over their love for video games as well as Sesh Hollow Waterboy's music. Omen 13 would also come to meet up at the house, and together they would all start working on a project known as 13 Degrees, as well as recording the song known as Homecoming. Soon after that, the whole Schema Posse would go to Denver, and this is kind of the third wave of Schema Posse, although it's more like a weird little group that Peep would introduce to Schema Posse. They were kind of in it, kind of not, including Ginny V, Young Goth, and It's Okay to Cry. Of course, looking at it now, we know all these guys were kind of a bad influence on Peep, and they also have their own heinous crimes under their belt, mostly looking at Young Goth, but one positive member of this group was Quiet Camp, who was a pretty early documentarian in the underground scene at the time, and is also known for working on the Masquerilla podcast in today's day and age, but at the time he was shooting a little series called Underground Rising. He also shot a couple music videos for Lil Peep and Jay Green, being Switch Up and Round Here, which both got on No Jumper and got them a lot more attention. After this, Craig Zen and Peep get into another disagreement, and he ends up leaving Schema Posse to try to form up a group known as Silver Fox Charm Babies. While he's high on acid, it was supposed to be It's Okay to Cry, Jimmy V, and Young Goth, but the group never really went anywhere because they only ended up doing one show and slapping their logo on a couple Peep songs, but overall it was pretty much a non-factor. After this, the Schema Posse performed some of their best shows of all time, but unfortunately a lot of bullshit went down during that time too, with the Suicide Boys and Jay Green falling out, Ghostman getting mad about stuff, Lil Peep missing shows, and overall it just seems like the threads of Schema Posse were really starting to come apart. This all led up to the Schema Posse No Jumper interview, which should have been a big moment for the group, but unfortunately Adam only really wanted to interview Jay Green, Lil Peep, and Ghostman, and on top of that, Ghostman and Lil Peep didn't really talk, only Jay Green had stuff to say. This really hurt the group's reputation because once again people thought it was only Jay Green, Ghostman, and Lil Peep, and they didn't know about all the other members who were standing just just off screen, and then after that, Peep actually ended up performing a show with Ham on everything, none of the Schema Posse being allowed to perform with Peep at that show, which made Jay Green very mad, with Peep calling him out for not giving him enough for the shows. And then after that, Peep and him had a falling out. He left on the Puya and Fat Nick tour, and he announced that he was leaving Schema Posse once and for all. And to make things even worse, immediately after that, Ghostman would announce that he was leaving the group as well, with No Jumper going on to say that Schema Posse was over, which of course it wasn't, because many of the OG members were still together. And when Peep left, he would take Brendan Savage, Young Goth, and Jenny V along with him, but strangely enough, It's Okay to Cry actually tried to stick around with Schema Posse, even got a Schema Posse tattoo, but after Peep and all the boys made fun of him bad enough, he ended up leaving as well. After this, the group would try to recruit new members, including Death Plus, Astro Trap, and Gizmo, but unfortunately they were all pretty short-lived, only sticking around for a couple weeks. At this point, KD tries to take control of the group, dropping a compilation album known as Sin City Schema. After this, the group tries to work on a new project, but due to Jay Green's favoritism, once again it doesn't go through. After that, Jay Green becomes quite distant, and KD decides to make an entire project with all the Schema boys minus Jay Green. After Green found out this project came out, he was super upset, didn't promote it, and Kold decided to just get away from the situation for a while and go see Peep while he was on tour. He ended up pulling up to this place called the Witter House, where he met Wavy Jones and Black Smurf, and they told him about how Peep and Craig Zen were still at it, and Peep was extremely stressed, and they were trying to keep Craig Zen and all the bad influences away from him, which was once again creating more tension. After that, Cold would catch up with Omen, and then Peep would pull up with Tracy, introducing the two to each other for the first time, and then he would explain to Cold how stressed out he was and how he felt like he was still getting taken advantage of and not getting the proper amount of pay for the shows. And he would also mention about how Jay Green tweeted that he didn't hate Ghostman and Lil Peep anymore, with Peep saying that he never realized that Jay Green actually hated him in the first place. So Cold put the two on the phone, they made up, and then after that, Fat Nick would take Lil Peep on stage, and that was the last time that Cold ever seen Lil Peep while he was alive. Not long after that, Cold was supposed to perform one more show with Young Goth and Lil Peep, but they never ended up showing up, so instead Omen 13 pulled up, told Cold about how bad things had gotten with Craig Zen turning all the utilities off in the house. But despite all that, Omen and Cold ended up performing a really good show. All the fans really loved it, and they thought they were only going up from there. But unfortunately, soon after that, Jay Green would announce that Schema Posse was no more, which of course was a huge slap in the face to the entire group that had been working all this time to try to really make it into something special. But despite that, Cold and Omen 13 kept performing together throughout the year until unfortunately at the very end of the year on November 15th, they both got bad news. Omen's birth mother had gotten terminally ill and passed away, as well as Lil Peep overdosing that very same day. When it comes to 2018, not a whole lot happened. Schema Posse tried to form up again, but it ended up falling apart before it really got off the ground. In 2019, Cold ended up dropping a solo project with no features called Wicked Hearts that actually included a tribute to Lil Peep. And in 2020, Cold and Omen were set to do a tour in China, but unfortunately before they got to go, the funding was cut and Omen had to go by himself. And if that wasn't bad enough, the tour was a disaster. Omen ended up hurting himself on a motorcycle, and after that he couldn't really perform. But despite the bad luck, he ended up starting up a group known as Red Star, which had a house with all the members living in it, and Cold would often roll up and make music there, which of course made Jay Green really mad because he thought that Omen 13 was trying to take Cold away from Schema Posse, but Cold told him that Schema Posse really wasn't active and he was only making music there because, well, he was close friends with Omen, and Jay Green had told him time and time again he had no friends and Cold was not his friend. Despite that though, Cold would tell Jay Green he was still part of Schema Posse even though it wasn't active. He was just hanging out with Red Star and it really wasn't that serious. The group ended up building a stage in the backyard so Omen could still perform even though he wasn't able to go to shows outside of the state, which caused even more conflict with Jay Green because Omen was supposed to pull up to his show, but because he was hurt from his motorcycle accident he couldn't make it there. But of course Jay Green didn't really understand that. But that wouldn't matter too much because soon after the pandemic hit and nobody could do shows, leaving Cold locked in his house, making a couple songs, recording a couple music videos, but overall not doing too much. This was until he got the phone call from Jay Green saying that he wanted to bring Schema Posse back one more time and that if Cold came back he would be the main star of the group, which of course was bullshit, but at the time Cold wanted it to work so bad that he agreed. They ended up bringing in new and old members alike with Lil Zav, Teddy Slugs, Akatami, and of course Dylan Ross. Well, he wasn't really a full-on member, but he definitely was in Cold corner at the time. But the big star of the group this time was known as Sempra, a new artist from Australia that Jay Green had brought in to be his kind of new ghost main. At the time though, Cold wasn't really aware of that, and he was harvesting songs off of his solo project to put on the new Schema tape. But before they could even get their first project off the ground, Dylan Ross ended up getting cancelled for his allegations, and it seems like things were going back into the same bad spot again. Despite that, the group held it together and dropped Schema Posse New Age in mid-2020 with the fans going wild, the vlogs loving it, and it seemed like Schema Posse was really back, so they needed to follow it up with a new tape. This project was set to drop on Halloween, and of course because of that it had a lot of horror inspired visuals on the album cover, but for some reason Jay Green had a problem with that. It wasn't that big of a deal, they still ended up dropping it, but once again Jay Green was creating problems for absolutely no reason. The project ended up only being about 6 songs long, with a bunch of members getting cut off, which of course made them feel a certain type of way, so the plan for the next project was to put a new member with an old member on every single song so everybody got represented and even the smallest artists could get a buzz. But before that project could come out, they ended up dropping a mixtape called Phantom Hearts, which was a really weird switch up for the Schema Posse, and a lot of fans didn't really gel with it. So the new plan was for all the Schemas to go out to Atlanta, meet up with Jay Green, and then record the album there, do a bunch of visuals, but unfortunately Jay Green got weirdly distant around this time and started complaining about the past with Peep and Ghostman. Kold goes back to the Red Star house where he talks to Omen 13, who tells him that him and Jay Green haven't really been cool for a long time. Despite that though, Kold and the Schemas still go out to Atlanta, start performing a bunch of shows, and one of those shows in particular was really important. It was this once in a lifetime show where Eddie Baker, Bones, Omen 13, and a bunch of other underground OGs all came out to show support to the Schema Boys. People were putting their old beefs behind them, talking about music, new connections were being made. It seems like after the perspective of the pandemic, with everybody being locked inside, not getting human connection, they realized a lot of their beefs were very petty and decided to put it behind them and start working on the music again, doing shows, and the underground seemed like it was really back. But of course, there was one person there that just couldn't let the past go, and that was Jay Green, who started to try to start problems with Omen 13, leading him to tweet out that he was only there to see Kold Blooded, and that was the final nail in the coffin for the two to be full on beefing. Kold Blooded tried his best to stay impartial in the situation. He ended up linking up with a new videographer, and he was making a lot of movement with him, but then Jay Green ended up coming down to Vegas and ruining that as well. And all of those factors led up to the final fall of Schema Posse, when there was a final confrontation with one factor in particular really ending this long-lasting collective once and for all. And what was that? It was an NFT. Yep, it turns out there was a member of the group known as Koda who wanted to make an NFT project for the Schema Boys. It turns out that they weren't really into it, but he decided to do some mock-ups anyways, and he did one for Jay Green, and it had a pink background. And for some reason, this was such an insult to Jay Green's masculinity that he ended up trying to kick Koda out, and this finally led Kold Blooded to snap on Jay Green. After 10 years of dealing with his bullshit and having everything but the music be the forefront of their collective, Kold Blooded couldn't take it anymore and decided to full on call out Jay Green for everything that he had done to him over his entire career, and asked him why he felt the need to always mess up everything they had going. And what did Jay Green respond with? Well, not really anything. He ended up laughing it off, and then he made a new group chat without Kold Blooded in it, and because of that, everybody noticed that he wasn't in there anymore. All the Schemas ended up leaving the group, and Schema Posse finally fell apart for the last time. And that was in 2022, and sadly to this day, Kold Blooded and Jay Green have never spoken again. There's been a couple of moments where it seems like maybe they will, or maybe they'll come back together, but at this point, it seems like Schema Posse is finally over forever. There was a lot of great moments, they made a lot of great music, there was a lot of important members, and of course, Ghostman, Lil Peep, Sempra, all these guys went on to have great careers afterwards. But unfortunately, Kold Blooded was left behind time and time again. He put everybody else before him, he tried to deal with all the bullshit, stay out of problems, and for the most part, everybody has good things to say about him. He never really had any issues with anybody. And it's like they say, nice guys finish last. But that doesn't mean that Kold Blooded's done. He's still making music, he's still out there doing his thing, he still has connections with all these people, and he's still definitely a big part of the underground scene. But no matter what, after 15 years working in this scene, I definitely have to give it to him. He's definitely an OG by my standard, and I feel like a lot of people got to put more respect on his name because he's been there for so much, he's seen so much, and he's a very important part of the scene. There's a lot of guys that end up getting left in the background, they never get their stories told, but I'm just happy that I was finally able to tell this story in the way that it was meant to be told, and big shout out to Kold Blooded. So let me know what Schema member I should mention next, or just artist in general. I'm definitely thinking Omen 13 could be a cool one. I see a lot of you guys in the comments talking about him, so I think that could be a great video. But besides that, let me know what you think about the Kold Blooded story. Subscribe to the channel if you're up for it. Shout out Knife Gang. And to all of you guys asking about the Patreon, I actually do have it. It's in the link tree if you want to go there. It's just $1 a month. It would really help me out. It will give me the funds to turn this into a more professional operation, but even you guys just watching is enough. I really appreciate you all. Once again, I say shout out Knife Gang, shout out Kold Blooded, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.